we are back for episode 5.7. Our episode begins at the Wall, where we find Tormund being released so he and Jon can venture to Hardhome to pick up the remaining wildlings. Jon gives Alliser Thorne command of the Wall, and Alliser expresses his disagreement with Jon's decision. Jon then says goodbye to Sam, who gives him some dragonglass, and he and Tormund are off. Now this scene is kind of a conflation of a bunch of different scenes from the book. So in the book, Tormund is never captured, but is leading one of 3 groups of wildlings north of the Wall after the Battle of Castle Black. The Weeper and Mother Mole lead the other 2. The Weeper's group is west, towards the Shadow Tower, Tormund is more central, and Mother Mole is east at Hardhome near Eastwatch. It's Mance's sister-in-law, Val, who was captured during the Battle of Castle Black, and Jon sends her off to bring back Tormund's group, much to the disapproval of First Steward Bowen Marsh, who is worried about the food situation at the Wall. Alliser Thorne is sent ranging fairly early in the final book, and we don't know his fate. With Hardhome and Mother Mole's group of wildlings, Jon sends the commander of Eastwatch, Cutter Pike, with ships to bring the wildlings back. The mission is a disaster, with Pike's crew suffering losses from storms and attacks from the wildlings. And so Jon plans a rescue mission over land for Pike and the wildlings. However, Jon's mission to Hardhome never happens. He receives the infamous pink letter claiming that Ramsay has won the war over Stannis. He then puts Tormund in charge of the mission before being stabbed by Bowen Marsh and company. Next we get an extra scene with Eamon enjoying the company of Baby Sam, and Eamon brings up that Baby Sam sounds like his brother Egg when he laughs. Now in the book there are actually 2 babies at the Wall at one point. Mance's son, Aemon Battleborn, and Gilly's son, Monster. Neither actually have real names, as it's unlucky to name wildling children before their 2nd birthday. Anyway, in the book, Eamon and Jon at some point have a discussion about Melisandre and her plans. Eamon convinces Jon to send him and Mance's son south under the pretense of getting King's blood away from Melisandre. Eamon and Mance's son both being sons of kings. Now, Melisandre never expresses any interest in these 2 characters for her spells, so it's uncertain if Eamon had other motives for wanting to leave the Wall. Now, rather significantly, there's supposed to be a baby swap. Aemon Battleborn is supposed to be swapped with Monster to trick Stannis and Melisandre, though there is some debate on whether or not this swap actually occurred. Whatever the case, Gilly, quite distraught, takes who we think is Aemon Battleborn south, while Monster stays at the Wall posing as Mance's son. Now you may wonder why this baby situation matters, but we should remember that Monster was supposed to be sacrificed to the others, and they may want him back, and Aemon Battleborn is an incredible hostage if Mance ever regains power. Not to mention, many people believe that baby swaps are important thematically when we think of the parentage of Jon, Dany, and the new claimant Aegon. Next we get an extra scene of Theon bringing meals to Sansa, who is clearly showing signs of physical abuse. Sansa also seems to be a prisoner now, and begs Theon for his help. She asks Theon to go to the old tower to light a candle in an effort to call for help. Theon heads out into the snow, looks to the tower, but instead goes to report the whole incident to Ramsay. Meanwhile, Brienne looks on to see nothing. Now in the book, Jane Poole is also beaten and abused by Ramsay. In her case, she's not allowed to leave the room, and guards are posted outside her door. She does beg Theon for help, but he simply tells her to do as she's told. Here in the show, Theon brings meals to Sansa, but in the book, Theon is humiliated by being made Jane's handmaid. Now, as in the book, a storm seems to be hitting Winterfell, though in the book it's feet and feet of snow. During this snowstorm, Mance Rayder's spearwives keep approaching Theon and asking him for information on how he conquered Winterfell. The crew is clearly trying to figure out a way to escape, but Theon is too fearful that they work for Ramsay and tells them nothing. Next we have Aemon dying at the Wall, and in his final hours he delusionally thinks that he's young, talking to his brother Egg, and that he dreamed of being old. Now, this line is taken from the book, but said by Aemon under very different circumstances. So in the book, Sam, Gilly, Aemon, baby Aemon, and a singer named Darian head south to Old Town. Only they get stuck in Braavos, in part because Aemon becomes ill and the captain doesn't want him to die aboard, and in part because of some serious mismanagement of money by Sam. The singer Darian takes well to Braavos and wants to stay, but Arya ends up murdering him for deserting the Night's Watch. Darian, by the way, always maintained his innocence for the crime that sent him to the Wall. Anyway, while on this trip, it seems that someone started invading Aemon's mind with a magical device called a glass candle. It's in Old Town that Sam eventually meets Oberyn's daughter Sorella Sand and Archmaester Marwyn, who possess a glass candle. Sorella Sand admits that they were using a glass candle to watch him and Aemon. Anyway, glass candles have the ability to enter people's dreams, and it's during this boat trip to Old Town that Aemon starts having funky dreams himself. Aemon believes he's young, talking to his brother Egg, and he says the line, "Egg, I dreamed I was old." It's uncertain what the Dream Invaders were trying to get from Aemon, but it should be noted that he spent his entire life studying prophecy, and he and his brothers were cursed with prophetic dreams. Now Sam does eventually escape Braavos and makes it to Old Town, but only because a servant of Marwyn, a man named Kohuro Mo, agrees to take them aboard his ship, the Cinnamon Wind. Next here in the show, we have Aemon's funeral. Sam speaks for Aemon, then burns his body, and then Alliser Thorne taunts Sam, saying that all of his friends are dying. Now this eulogy that Sam gives for Aemon is actually right out of the book, though a bit abridged. Here in the show, the funeral happens at the Wall among the Night's Watch, but in the book, it actually occurs on the deck of a ship, the Cinnamon Wind. Aemon, after hearing news of Dany and her dragons in Braavos, becomes reinvigorated, believing her to be the fulfillment of prophecy, and so Sam's crew, minus the singer Darien, once again continues their journey south. Aemon even thinks he has the energy to go to Dany directly to be her advisor, though once on the ship he becomes sick again. As in the show, he asks to hold the babe the night he dies. Now here in the show, the surrounding of the funeral is somber, but on the ship among the Summer Islanders, they celebrate the dead, so they are all upbeat, while only Sam mourns. It's also worth noting that in the book, Aemon's body isn't burned as they're on a ship, but instead it's put in a cask of rum for preservation. It's uncertain what eventually happens to Aemon's body and its so-called king's blood. The Cinnamon Wind eventually heads out to find Dany with Archmaester Marwyn aboard. We have no idea if Aemon's body was unloaded. Next we have an extra scene where Sansa and Ramsay discuss the politics of the North, while Sansa steals a corkscrew. Ramsay lets us know that Stannis has foreign sellswords to bolster his army, but Ramsay is rather pleased that a storm has hit, as Northerners are experienced fighting in winter while Stannis' men are Southerners. Sansa then brings up that Fat Walda is pregnant, and that her son would be a threat to his claim regardless of Ramsay's legitimization by Tommen. Ramsay dismisses this threat and then mentions that Jon Snow is now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Now in the book, the situation at Winterfell is much more dire for the Boltons. The Boltons and their allies are actually suffering quite a bit in Winterfell because Winterfell's heating system, fed by hot springs, is not working. Additionally, Winterfell is suffering serious food shortages, and many of the Bolton allies are secretly Stannis supporters. It should be noted that in the book, Stannis' army is actually a mix of Northerners and Southerners, with the Northerners quite used to fighting in the snow and dismissing the storm as nothing. Now, the pregnancy of Fat Walda is actually a much larger issue in the book, as the Freys are a major force at Winterfell supporting the Boltons. The Freys certainly believe that Walda's child will get the Dreadfort, while Ramsay believes he will get it. Of course, here in the show, the Freys have no army at Winterfell. Now, here in the show, Ramsay is the first to tell Sansa of Jon Snow's rise to Lord Commander, but in the book, it's actually a scheming woman in the Vale named Miranda Royce. Sansa's shock and surprise at Jon Snow's rise almost certainly outs the fact that Sansa is not Elaine, who she is posing as, but in fact Sansa Stark. This is all followed by an extra scene of Ramsay showing off the flayed woman who wanted to help Sansa, and Theon feeling sad about his cowardice. None of this happens in the book. Next we come to Stannis' forces, snowed in and unable to advance. Davos then gives the count of deaths and losses in the middle of the night, and explains that they're running out of food, and that one of their sellsword companies, the Stormcrows, rode off in the night. Davos suggests retreating, but Stannis refuses, believing that if they retreat to Castle Black, they will winter there. Stannis then gets angry with Melisandre, but she says that she's seen herself at Winterfell, and she suggests sacrificing Shireen. Stannis refuses and tells Mel to get out. Now in the book, the whole situation with Stannis' march is quite different. So neither Davos or Melisandre are with Stannis in the book. We largely hear about the events of Stannis through the eyes of Theon's sister Asha, who was captured at Deepwood Motte. Stannis' army is a mix of Northerners and Southerners. He doesn't have any sellswords at this moment. And incidentally, in the book, the Stormcrows is Daario Naharis' sellsword company over in Slaver's Bay. In the book, Stannis is actually rather solitary, staring into flames at night, and only occasionally talking to his lieutenants, Richard Horpe, Justin Massey, Godfrey Faring, and Clayton Suggs. Stannis' men are starving and seemingly snowed in, and there is a cold count of losses each day, but there is some question to whether getting snowed in is part of Stannis' plan. In the book, Stannis sits 3 days from Winterfell, and Stannis chooses to stay put in a crofter's village near a lake as he believes it's a superior position. We aren't quite sure why it's a superior position, but it should be noted that his men have been ice fishing the lake, and so it may be that there's hope that an attacking force would fall into the holes in the lake during a charge. We next get an extra scene of Gilly trying to do some chores when 2 brothers of the Night's Watch come in and try to rape her. Sam comes in to defend her, but is promptly beat up. Ghost then saves the day and the men run off. Gilly then cares for Sam's wounds and proceeds to give him some reward sex. Now Sam never defends Gilly from anyone in the book, however Sam does eventually sleep with Gilly. After Aemon's funeral, when Sam has had a bit to drink, she seduces him, and in the book our author infamously describes Sam's penis as a fat pink mast. Now there is some question to why Gilly chose this moment to seduce Sam. She may have simply been trying to make him feel better, but another reason might be that this is actually the first time that the two had any privacy. Throughout their journey south, Sam keeps having everyone sleep in the same room and thus avoiding any intimate situations with Gilly. Next we come to Slaver's Bay, where Jorah and Tyrion are being auctioned off as slaves. We get a funny history of Jorah where the seller keeps getting various facts wrong, and then Jorah goes for a good price, and Tyrion begs to be bought as well. He proceeds to beat up a man to prove that he's a fighter. Now in the book the situation is quite reversed. It's Tyrion who's in demand as an entertainment dwarf, and Tyrion keeps telling funny jokes to get his price elevated. Jorah, though, after his capture, becomes rather despondent, and his bids are rather low for pit fighting. Tyrion, taking pity on Jorah, convinces his buyer that the two are part of a comedy team, and so Jorah is bought as well, as is Penny, the other dwarf who is traveling with them. Next we have a scene where Dany and Daario are abed discussing the politics of Meereen. Dany is to wed Hisdar, but Daario warns that Hisdar is secretly the leader of the Sons of the Harpy. He wants to marry Dany instead. He also suggests that Dany round up all of the wise masters and murder them. She says that she's not a butcher, and Daario says that rulers are either butchers or meat. So this scene is a bit of a combination of a couple of scenes from the book. Fairly early in Dany's rule, Daario does suggest murdering the heads of all of the families in Meereen and taking their money. This is essentially a Red Wedding callback, and something that Dany did herself back in A Storm of Swords with the Second Sons. In the book, Daario says, "Better a butcher than meat, all kings are butchers, are queens so different." Later on when the two are abed, Daario does suggest marrying him over Hisdar, though Daario never accuses Hisdar of leading the Sons of the Harpy. Dany's advisor Skahaz is the one that keeps trying to do that. Now it should be noted that in the book, the relationship between Daario and Dany is much more emotional. Here in the show, Dany assures Daario that he will continue on as a paramour, but in the book, Dany believes that their affair must stop with her marriage. Daario deals with Dany's coming marriage poorly, mainly by getting drunk and going out and killing people. Next we get an extra scene where Alina talks to the High Sparrow and tries to bribe him. This is followed by her getting a letter from Littlefinger. Now Alina has a much smaller role in the book and does not come to King's Landing when Margaery is arrested. This is followed by an extra scene where Tommen is furious about Margaery's arrest and doesn't know what to do. Cersei says that she'll go talk to the High Sparrow for him. None of this happens in the book. Now in the book, Cersei does have a particular reason for going to see the High Sparrow. She wants Margaery to have no defenders in a potential trial by battle, and so to achieve this, Cersei plans on convincing the High Sparrow that only the Kingsguard can defend Margaery. Margaery is, after all, a queen. However, the 7 Kingsguard are largely incapacitated in the book. Jaime is away and handless. Balon Swan and Aerys Oakhart are off in Dorne. Loras Tyrell is supposedly injured, and Osmond Kettleblack is the brother of an accuser. This leaves the worst fighters of the bunch, Meryn Trant and Boris Blount, and Cersei plans on telling Trant to play sick, leaving Blount. Next we get an extra scene between Jaime and Myrcella, where Jaime lets Myrcella know that she'll be coming home to King's Landing, and Myrcella protests that Dorne is her home now. Now in the book, Jaime and Myrcella really don't have any relationship at all. They only share one scene together, and that's at the beginning of A Game of Thrones when the Lannisters are eating breakfast. Jaime kept his distance from his children for fear that the incest would be discovered. As a result, Jaime doesn't really care about his children and rarely thinks of them. In fact, he really only ponders Myrcella as a person on a couple of occasions. Once he thinks about marrying her off to Joffrey so they can continue the Lannister line, and once he thinks about Myrcella's innocence and how he needs to tell her of her parentage. We then get an extra scene of the Sand Snakes and Bronn in prison, and Bronn says that Tyene is not the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. And so Tyene strips, gets Bronn's pulse going, and a poison in his system starts taking effect. After Bronn admits Tyene is the most beautiful woman in the world, she gives him the antidote. Now in the book, after the failed kidnapping of Myrcella, or perhaps Myrcella's double, Doran's daughter, Arianna Martell, is imprisoned, and we have a long chapter of her dealing with captivity and isolation. She feels tremendous guilt for the death of her lover, the Kingsguard Aerys Oakheart, and worries about her arrested friends. She tries to have the servants do her bidding and attempts to get messages out, and fails on all fronts. Eventually, she falls into a deep depression and stops eating, and finally her father, Doran Martell, releases her. This is followed by an extra scene where Littlefinger and Olenna meet and discuss politics a bit, including their murder of Joffrey, and Littlefinger says that he has a gift that can help Olenna. Of course, none of this happens in the book, as Littlefinger is still in the Vale and Olenna still in the Reach. This is followed by an extra scene where Jorah and Tyrion are preparing for battle in some fighting pit. By chance, though, Dany and Hizdahr are doing a tour of these lesser fighting pits. The fighting commences and Dany is disgusted by the death, and then Jorah comes out and beats everyone up non-lethally and wins. He begs for Dany's ear, which she initially refuses, as Tyrion manages to escape his chains. Jorah tells Dany that he has a gift for her, and Tyrion comes out and presents himself as that gift. Now Dany and Tyrion have yet to meet in the book, but they do have a near miss. So after Tyrion, Jorah, and Penny are bought, Tyrion and Penny are given a gig by their master as jousting dwarves for Dany at the reopening of the fighting pits in celebration of Dany and Hizdahr's wedding. However, the comedy of their appearance is a bit sinister. While jousting, lions are to be released, killing them. Hizdahr mentions this to Dany, and she orders the lions to not be released, saving Tyrion's life. And that's the closest Tyrion and Dany get to meeting. Dany takes off on her dragon soon after these events, leaving Jorah and Tyrion in Slaver's Bay without her. And finally, we have Cersei visiting Margaery, imprisoned with the High Sparrow. Margaery knows that this is all Cersei's treachery, and screams at Cersei to leave. Now in the book, Margaery doesn't figure out that this is all Cersei's doing until halfway through talking to her. After Cersei reveals that Margaery only has the choice of Meryn Trant or Boris Blount, Margaery realizes the whole plan. She believes her accuser, Osney Kettleblack, is a better fighter than the two, and figures this is all Cersei's doing. Now in truth, I would argue Meryn Trant is the better fighter, but neither Cersei nor Margaery know this. Whatever the case, in both book and show, the scene ends with Margaery calling Cersei a bitch and telling her to leave. Which brings us to our final scene of Cersei talking to the High Sparrow. The High Sparrow lets Cersei know that on top of Margaery, she will be judged for her crimes as well. Cersei is confused, and then the High Sparrow reveals that he has Lancel, who has spilled his guts. Cersei runs for the door, but is stopped by Septa Unella, and Cersei is imprisoned and threatens Septa Unella's life. Now in the book, Margaery is not arrested for lying, but for adultery. Cersei's crony Osney Kettleblack went to the High Sparrow and claimed he bedded her. However, the High Sparrow was suspicious of Osney and took him into custody and tortured him. Osney revealed that he killed the last High Septon and had sex with Cersei. When Cersei leaves Margaery in the book, the High Sparrow takes her to Osney being tortured. It's then Cersei runs. In the book, Cersei makes it a bit further. She's able to knock down several Septas and makes it across the Sept, but eventually 20 Septas take her down. She threatens the Septas with beheadings and says that Jaime will kill them all. Septa Unella does arrive, and Cersei threatens her with a beheading as well. Now in the book, Lancel does eventually confess his crimes to the High Sparrow. But these confessions are only after Osney Kettleblack confesses, adding insult to injury. And that's all for episode 5.7. See you in episode 5.8.